Hi, everyone. It's Charlie O'Donnell from Brooklyn Bridge Ventures, and we're back with another Stack Up Lunch and Learn. We're going to be talking with Abel about B2B marketing, but specifically during this time period. It's obviously been a pretty difficult period to figure out messaging process, collaboration with team. Abel and his team at Suzy have figured out a lot of that stuff. And he's going to share a little bit about what's been going on over the last kind of 6 months and what you've learned. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Charlie, and the entire team for really inviting us to participate in it. So today I'm really excited to kind of share with you a little bit about the world that we're playing in, which is really B2B marketing during a global crisis. So I think for us, a lot of the rules that we had even set out at the beginning of 2020 have had to be completely rewritten. And we've really had to change our playbook really starting in the beginning of March. So, just to give you a little bit of background of who I am. So I've been at Suzy really since January of 2019, and I'm a senior manager there overseeing a lot of our B2B marketing, whether that's B2B lead generation, a lot of our brand marketing efforts. And prior to that, I'd spent about 4.5 years working at Gray, which is a global advertising agency, working on clients such as HSBC, Kellogg's, Canon. And I like to say, when you're working in an agency, you're really building that toolkit of all the different types of marketing techniques and advertising specialties that you can really dive in and use kind of in the rest of your career. And I've been in New York City for about 6 years now, and I'm a big foodie. So if you guys have any restaurant recommendations, I'm always down to kind of try them out. And just to give you guys a little bit of background, Suzy, we are a New York City-based SaaS company. We're about 100 large now, and we are a real-time market research platform that really helps companies make better, faster, more data-driven decisions. And our tool really combines a few things. One, we have a high-quality advanced market research tool, and we have our own proprietary US panel. So not only do we have the tool that lets you field that research, but also we have made sure that the people actually answering those questions are some of the highest quality people that you can possibly get in the US. And I think what's kind of cool about it is that during the pandemic, we've seen that more so than ever, people really need a tool like Suzy to make sure that they're keeping a pulse on their consumer and they're understanding how sentiment is really rapidly shifting. I'm sure a lot of out there, your consumers are going through one of the most dramatic changes that we've ever seen. And their behaviors that they're starting to develop right now are probably going to be some of the things that really shift, their buying patterns, how they're spending money, and really how they're living their day-to-day lives. And I think a lot of the companies that we work have really used, Suzy to help keep a pulse on what's going on there. So, really, I want to take a step back and kind of take you on an adventure through time here. So if you guys put yourself back into March 2020, I remember the first few weeks of it. Actually, I was really drawn to this picture as I was going through my photos, but this was March 4th, 2020. This was our last time we were really in person as a team, actually at a market research trade show. So happy faces there. And we really had used live events as a great way to intersect with our audience. In the market research industry, there's a ton of these events that really draw together some of the biggest leaders in the insights community. And I think back and I look at this and I think, oh, wow, we've shifted so much of who we are as a company and the way that we approach marketing since we took this photo, really on March 4th. But, shortly after, I think 2 weeks after that, we really had a tornado that hit us. So, I really remember our leadership team sending out that email that said, hey, we're closing the office. We don't think we're going to be going back. And I think a few weeks after that, they told us that we actually weren't going to go back for the rest of 2020, which is kind of insane. So that really made us rethink a lot of the ways that we think about marketing and the different touch points that we use. I always go back to this quote. Matt Britton, he is the CEO of Suzy. And he had said this, and I think a lot of companies also thought this in the beginning was, you oftentimes want to judge a company that might be marketing their product during a crisis. But at the end of the day, Matt said it best, is that he is a company with a payroll that he has to make every other week. And I think before you really judge a company that's putting on a webinar or that's having a sales team reach out to you, just remember that that is a company that is fighting for their right to survive, and they're fighting to make sure that they can keep their employees during this difficult time. So, I think it's not so much the fact that you're conducting marketing during these times, but it's really the way that you're thinking about it and the way that you're talking about it and making sure that you're really being empathetic in all your different approaches there. So, what I'm going to really talk about for the next probably 15 minutes is 5 of kind of the key lessons that I've learned and really are the aha moments for me during COVID-19, and kind of things that hopefully I'm able to transfer onto you and that you can really start to impart into your actual marketing program. So I think the first one here for us was really creating that trust and finding a way to really support your community and the businesses that you work with. I think it's not so much what you're doing, but it's really who you're supporting, and you really build your brand by building that support. So what that meant for Suzy is at the beginning of the pandemic, we started by using our real-time insights platform to do a series of webinars that were really just free research reports to the overall insights community. So every single week we picked a different salient topic and we really dived into it and had about a 45-50-minute presentation where we were talking about exactly how consumer sentiment is shifting, where they're going. And I would say these are research reports that traditionally you would have to pay a lot of money to have access to, or you would have to commission your own research. And we touched on topics like overall consumer sentiment. We talked about advertising. We talked about back to school. We talked about the shifting nature of the home. And what we really did is that we democratized market research and insights for our community. So by providing them with this free resource, we really invited them into our world in terms of a low stress way. And we really showed them the value of Suzy without really selling in their face. And this series actually ended up being really successful for us. And we've continued it up to today. And really since the beginning of the pandemic, we've had almost 55,000 people who have engaged with either the content from this or some of the post-webinar content that we've created as part of this, which is pretty insane to think that you can really impact 55,000 people who then come into your funnel and they're listening to you talk about your product, which has been really incredible for us. To continue on to that, we also created a consumer insights hub here. So really taking a lot of those insights that we got from the Suzy platform, and we started creating different guides, infographics, different reports, really collecting all this knowledge center that we had created, really diving into our platform. So I think my challenge always to people is think about what your platform, what your software can offer to the world. And hopefully it's something that, there's some version of it or something that you can really give to people to help start to build that connection with them, hopefully for free. So we offered this completely for free. And interesting enough, it almost cost nothing to create. We didn't really put any money into kind of attracting an audience beyond some paid advertising. And we were able to attract up to 300 to 400 people per week. We're just coming in and constantly engaging with that content, which is pretty incredible. And finally, really creating those types of blog articles from it, really keeping some of those SEO words in mind, finding different ways that you can, take your insights and really create articles that help to benefit people and their lives. So, we touched on topics like important things to keep in mind when it comes to consumer spending in this kind of pandemic environment. So, I think for us, it was interesting to be able to use our platform for something that was socially good and making it accessible to everyone, whether you are an enterprise company all the way down to a startup, and really helping people find the best way that they could keep consumer sentiment across everything that they did and make sure that they had a pulse in terms of what's happening in the world. The second lesson that I think I learned is really you need to make sure that your advertising is aligned with what's happening in the world. You need to make sure that you are not tone deaf. And I don't think that's to say that you should not be advertising during a time of crisis, right? I think it's really making sure that your messaging really looks at the cultural and societal nuances that are happening and making sure that you're really keeping a pulse on that, right? The more that you can align your messaging to what's happening in the world, the more that helps you really intersect with the lives of your end consumer, which I think is so valuable. And here's just an example of something that we had created. Really simple, digital advertising that we use for digital pre-roll, we use for social, paid social. And it was really intersecting between this idea that consumers during this time needed to completely rethink their business strategy and they needed to rethink it really quickly. So, that was where Suzy best intersected, was helping people who woke up and their entire world was just completely shifted, and they needed to very quickly think about how they can restructure their marketing strategy, their product strategy, or their R&D strategy. I always think about this a lot. And, for me, how many of you at the end of the day, you are so zoomed out, you are tired of your meetings, you're exhausted after spending, 10 hours on a day talking to your colleagues, to your customers, etc. That really is something that I think about when it comes to our marketing content. Your prospects are exhausted. They do not want to spend more time on Zoom. There is just such a fatigue. And I think about this a lot. And this is really my guiding way when I think about our marketing content, whether that's a blog article, whether that is a webinar, whether that's advertising. You need to break through that Zoom fatigue. And if you want to break through that, you need to make sure your content is better than Netflix. And what I mean by that is, if your choice is between you sitting and watching a 30-minute webinar, which thank you all for kind of joining this, or sitting through an hour presentation, you need to make sure that it's better than them spending time with their families at home, better than them watching TV at home, better than them maybe spending an hour doing laundry. You need to make sure that what you're offering really has a lot of value to them. And it really cannot just be your standard webinar where you're talking at them. So a few ways that we kind of thought about it was, one, make sure you find an A-star cast, right? You don't want a C-level cast here. And for us, what that meant was really spotlighting some of our top clients talking about their stories during the pandemic. So making it almost docu-style in the way that we interviewed them, saying, hey, how are you really approaching COVID? How have you shifted your market research strategies? How have you shifted the way that your company is really using insights, and really not really selling a Suzy first story, but letting that naturally come into the conversation. And for us, this has ended up being one of the most successful strategies yet. We've hosted these different kind of live interview type things. And about 2 weeks ago, we had one of our largest signups, which was about 1,200 people who registered for it, with about 600 people who actually attended it live. So people want to hear from your A-list celebrities, not necessarily hearing directly from you just talking about your product. And I think we found ways to really naturally integrate ourselves into it without pushing a Suzy first messaging. Second, for us, it was really important to make sure that any content that we created and any advertising had an interactive nature to it, right? So you want to make sure that you really invite people into your narrative. And for us, we did this segment called Ask America. So throughout the series, whether it's a webinar, whether it's different types of content, every 10 to 15 minutes, we would ask the question of, hey, what do you want to know most about consumers right now? And what we had the luxury of doing is that, because of the fast nature of the Suzy tool, we could take what people wanted to know best, ask the audience, and by the end of the 30-minute session, we could reveal those results. So that helps it a way of really integrating people directly into our different types of content, and making sure that they felt like they were part of the story versus it just being us talking directly to them, which is pretty great. And finally, I think we made sure that we brought on industry-leading experts. So we work a lot with companies within the food and beverage industry. And one of the best leading experts out there is New Hope Network. So we were able to invite on one of their VPs of Insights, who really spends day in and day out talking about the food and beverage industry, to really lend an expert eye to it. So I think something for us to think about also is, think about the clients that you're selling into, whether that's food and beverage, whether that's a tech company. Think about what they care about and what experts they want to listen to, and really find ways that you can start to brokerage partnerships between your company and those experts. And for us, that ended up being such a rich conversation, because again, it wasn't a Suzy first conversation. It was us bringing on that expert to talk more about what they knew best, and then finding ways that potentially our tool could help support that conversation. So for us, it was really focusing on what a new normal of grocery shopping meant, and really how people were starting to approach both online and in-person shopping, which is pretty great. Finally, I think for me, this is kind of interesting, but what I learned is that your company is not the most important thing in the world that deserves a front page headline. So for you companies out there who have PR budgets, obviously, we are all tied to what's that ROI? Are they coming up with stories that help to push our story? And I think during a pandemic, and especially with everything going on in the world, we really quickly realized that we are not the most important thing in the world. So I think for us, it was a slight nuance, but we changed our approach to PR by inviting press to take part in our world. versus necessarily having them push out ours, our story. And, for us, that again meant inviting different media to actually participate in our different kind of digital events that we had here. So, example that we had here is that we invited Lindsay Mather. She's a deputy editor at Domino Media Group, which is a really large home-focused magazine, to really come in and join us. And what we got was, instead of just Matt talking about, the future of home and insights from it, we really invited Lindsay to really spotlight some of the work that she's doing. So some of the articles that she's created, some of the knowledge hubs that she's really started to forge forward. And I think that really helps you create content that is truly more interesting, right? And that kind of really ties back to my earlier point of, if you're going to create content, you got to make sure it's better than Netflix and that it's more interesting than anything else out there. So, we were really lucky to have Lindsay join us. And then actually next week, we're doing a webinar where we're going to have Crystal Lindell, who is an editor at Candy Industry, who's going to really be talking to us about how Halloween has changed. So again, finding a way that you can find different speakers from media to spotlight when you're talking about your own interesting kind of insights into the world. So again, for us, that's helped to add allure to what we're talking about and making sure that it's really a conversation between us and someone else and not just us talking at someone, which has been pretty incredible. And this is kind of my final lesson to you all, but I wake up every day and I'm scared, right? But I also think I'm incredibly excited. And I think what that means for me is that right now, everything that we know about B2B marketing has had to be rewritten. And I think it's kind of exciting for me in the sense that we get to charge forward and define what it means to be a new marketing center. And I think we have the new opportunity to experiment with new formats. And I'm not going to say every single thing we've tried has worked, because there's definitely been things that failed, that they were not successful. But there are new opportunities now that we are kind of all at home, glued to our computers, that we can really reach our consumers. So for me, I think that means taking that as an opportunity and really running with it, and not being scared to test out new formats that might seem a little unorthodox, but at the end of the day could have massive ROI in terms of delivering your marketing qualified leads and really increasing your brand awareness during this time. So one of the things that was kind of interesting for us was we started piloting this thing called executive roundtables that we use both at the top of the funnel and also mid funnel. So really finding ways that we can bring together our unique clients together, our prospects, and have conversations about the industry at large. So again, not really focusing on us, Suzy, as a product and saying, hey, Suzy is blah, blah, blah. Like, let's just talk about that. But really focusing on, hey, what are the challenges you're facing in the current market research industry? How are things being disrupted within your company? How has you as an industry really stayed on top of trends and everything like that? And for us, that helps you really broaden and put your company on top of mind. And it's not an expensive thing to do to say, hey, let's get 6 people, let's get you on a Zoom, and let's introduce a network and create that community, which has been super helpful for us. And again, I think this is just one of the many ways that we have been thinking about, hey, this is not necessarily something I would have done in a pre-COVID environment, but now we have that flexibility with everyone on Zoom. And how do we really maximize the fact that people have a little bit more time and they're not traveling, and they can really hop onto things like this pretty quickly. And it's been such a really good way for us to really build that brand for us. So, and another thing, we started our own first digital summit, which will be happening actually at the end of October. But again, another way where you can kind of create that in-person event feeling, but digitally. So, I think I talked about the really beginning of this is that we really leaned in heavily on having in-person events as part of, the tentpole of our marketing strategy. And we had to really shift the way that we thought about what it meant to build a community among our prospects and among our clients. And I'm really excited to have this be kind of the accumulation at the end of this year, a full summit where we're going to take some of those insights in terms of creating content like Netflix, bringing on those A-star casts to be part of it, and really creating an engaging experience that helps our consumers and our customers help to plan for what hopefully will be, a brighter year next year. And I always, this quote from Winston Churchill always kind of struck me, but a pessimist always sees the difficulty in every opportunity, but an optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. And I think for me, this year has been incredibly difficult. We've had to rethink everything that we know, and we've had to rethink the way that we structure our marketing programs. But if you keep a bright eye towards it and see the opportunity, everything, there's a lot that you can learn and a lot of things that you can start to build this year that help to build your brand and help to build that marketing strategy, which has been pretty incredible. So that's really all I have for you. But again, thank you all, so much for listening in and kind of going on this journey with me. And if you guys have any other questions or you want to chat more about how you can structure some of your B2B marketing or marketing in general, I'm always happy to kind of chat a little bit more with you.
So I have a bunch of questions, and I certainly want to invite folks. Oh, great! We'll go with focusing on the faces now for the Q&A. Anybody who wants to ask a question, you can use the Ask a Question button at the bottom, or just tap in the chat. But my first question is, a lot of people are listening to you talk about all the stuff that you did, right? And the pinnacle of it being this summit. And there are people sitting in the audience now thinking, that just seems like a ton of work, production value. Like, we don't have the staff and the capabilities to sort of pull that off. How do you manage being on a startup marketing team that probably doesn't have as many resources as you would like, with the volume of stuff you've been doing versus things like production value, things? Did you hire an outside team, or did you find that if the content's good, that's good enough, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and I think for me, there's a few. Obviously, we're lucky in the sense that we have some of the resources to help us really operationalize it. We have a creative team and different partners that can help us. But I think when we first started, it was literally our CEO who was like, I have this idea, let's do it. We had no resources that were attached to it. And I think about it, there's kind of baby steps to it, right? I think one of the ideas that I talked about was, how can you get clients on some sort of round table in a Zoom room? You don't need a high production value for that. If you have a Zoom account, you can invite 5 people for 45 minutes for free. And that's not a really difficult thing for you to do there, right? I think the second thing, doing webinars type things, sure, you can get a really expensive platform, but you really easily can buy, Zoom webinars for a couple $100, and you can use MailChimp for free to email out to people. And you can pretty quickly use different resources like Canva, which can help you make creative assets, and you can build together a program pretty quickly. I think the thing for us to always realize is that when you're thinking about your content, it's not so much having your company come through first, right? I'm not selling a Suzy first story and all of these things. Suzy is underpinned in all of that, but it's really, how do I make sure that I'm adding value to my end consumer and making sure that they really view Suzy as a partner, whether that's as a paid partner, whether it's a free partner right now, but keeping us top of mind, so that hopefully one day when they do have budgets back, when things become unfrozen, that they're like, oh yeah, I've been going to Suzy webinars for the last year. I've seen the amount of value that they will breathe. I really love what they do, but sure, I don't have the budget now, but next year when things are hopefully looking a little better, hopefully it can be a much, much easier conversation where it's a little bit warmer for that lead.
And did you take that content, those webinars, and try and turn them into anything else? Instead of just posting a full, hour-long webinar, do you chop it up into clips? Do you try and write blog posts out of it? And is that the internal team that would do that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I won't promise to take this idea as my own, but our content, strategy team, we have this idea of, the webinar itself, or that video content, or that panel is really your Thanksgiving turkey, right? So you have your Thanksgiving turkey, you put a lot of effort to it, it comes out on Thanksgiving. But when you're done with that, you have all these bits and pieces that you can then make meals for the next 2 weeks. And we really think about the ways that we can really continue to breathe life into that content. So a few things that we did were, one, we wrote blog articles, so taking some of the highlights from that and posting that. 2, we started to take those webinars and started making little 30-second clips of some of the highlights of those. 3, we're taking out maybe little quotes from it and posting it on social media. And then 4, we'll continue to run that content as kind of on-demand things. So we'll have paid social that drives to that, really, so that we can continue to collect those leads for it. So I think for each of those contents, it gives you a world of things that you can use afterwards. But I think fundamentally, you need to make sure that that content is interesting, right? And I always like saying that it has to be better than Netflix, because we are fighting against everything in this world right now. And in order to really break through, it needs to be something that's truly engaging.
So I have a question specific to surveys, which obviously is what you guys know and do for a living. I had a portfolio company of mine, a company called Artemis, do a B2B survey on their market, which is indoor farming. And it turned out to be one of the best lead gen tools for the company. It was kind of a very niche area. There's not a lot of coverage in terms of information. They wound up emailing a bunch of customers, things that everybody would sort of want to know about what the market is doing, and they found it very useful. And so it's something that I've suggested to other companies to do. I'd be curious, do you have any tips on industry surveys? If you want to gather usable, press-worthy information from a set of customers, any sort of high-level tips on how to go about doing it, how to make surveys useful if you're not in the business of doing a survey, or would you say, look, there's professionals who do this, you should go hire somebody to ask the right questions and pull the right information?
Yeah, definitely. So, it's interesting because Suzy as a platform, we are meant to be DIY, right? So the fact that you or anyone on your team can very quickly go into this platform and run a 10-question survey. So I'm not going to pretend that our platform necessarily has people who specialize in indoor farming. That's probably a much harder segment to do. But let's say your audience is a little bit more general, and we want to talk to people who are doing home renovations in the next 6 months, or we want to talk to people who are in the market for purchasing a new car. Or something like that, or people who maybe have gone and purchased at a farmer's market in the last 6 months. We can really easily segment out that audience. And I think what's interesting is that we've seen a lot of growth within this idea of do-it-yourself market research. So being able to field your own questions, being able to select and segment out those audiences, that's really what tools such as Suzy do best. And I think you can really quickly, and what we do is that we run those surveys all the time, right? That's what ends up being the content that we talk about in our State of Consumer webinars. That ends up being the content that we, if we do press releases, it's really based on that industry knowledge that we can transfer out. So I think there's a lot of tools out there that can help you do that kind of stuff right now. And again, that kind of knowledge is definitely what people care about and they want to know more about.
And to some extent, I would imagine that you have to get company buy-in on this, because I saw your CEO was doing one of those webinars, but there are a whole bunch of people out in the market who are, your individual contributors, your doers, your founders that are much more comfortable in the weeds than necessarily, being on that Zoom and all that sort of stuff. Any tips for getting people bought in on being out there? Because there's, a lot of fear from some people of like, well, I'm not comfortable about this, or I don't want to necessarily put this up on the web for everybody to see. What if we say something that, what if we get canceled? I mean, it's probably unlikely that you'll say something in a B2B marketing seminar but it's probably a thing that people ask about, right?
I think it's interesting, right? We are really fortunate in the fact that Matt, our CEO, he is a keynote speaker, so he loves to go on stage. But I think what's for us, I always think about the fact that we are in a pandemic right now. You are in, and I'm sure most of the companies within your portfolio, most of the entrepreneurs out there, you are in a fight for your survival, right? If you don't do marketing right now, if you don't put yourself out there and start to develop that relationship with brands, someone else is going to come out there and do it. And I think you have to be fearless. And if you're not fearless, someone else is going to eat your breakfast. And I think one of the ways that we help it, and I won't say Matt is an incredible speaker, but one of the ways that we help make it a better conversation is, one, how can you invite some of your clients to come join in? Two, how can you find different press to join in? So, for us to invite someone from the media to join in actually doesn't cost any money. We didn't pay for any of those people to join in. It was, hey, XYZ editor, I see you're writing about this. We're talking about this topic during an upcoming conversation. I know you're an expert. Do you want to come and join into that? And that helps to make it much more of a dialogue for people who might be a little bit more afraid to do, a one-man keynote.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, listen, thanks so much for all your time. I really appreciate it. And this, look, this is useful outside of our current situation, right? I mean, I think what's happening is a lot of times people are perfecting and honing a bunch of new skills that they have to depend on now, that they will continue to use. And it's not as if,
right.
A year from now the vaccine comes out and you guys are going to stop doing this. Right. You're going to sort of, continue to do this content creation, and it's. I think it's something that people will more and more appreciate. And I think one thing to keep in mind too is if you talk to sales teams, they will say that customers are now more informed than ever, that it's even selling has become less of an influential sale and more of something where your customers have seen the webinar, they've seen the discussion, they've read the survey already, and they come in. And so the more that you can put information in their hands when they're making a buying decision, it makes the lives of your salespeople that much easier.
Definitely. And for us, it's always at the end of the day, how do you nurture those people? So, people might not be in the market now. Obviously, budgets are being slashed here and there. And I think we realize that, right? And I think the more you can keep people top of mind and build that trust with them and build that brand among them, the better that you're going to be next year when they hopefully have budget and more of an appetite to hopefully buy your tool.
Cool. 2 quick questions to wrap up. One is, I noticed at one point you said that this is not only a top of funnel kind of marketing tool, but you had at one point a roundtable that seemed to be more focused on the kinds of questions that people would consider when making a decision. So it was producing content for people who were already in your funnel that I guess you were, sending out as part of maybe a drip campaign or something like that. So I think that was super interesting. That was less of a question than a point, but my other question was, I'm sure with a lot of these content marketing initiatives, you talked about, 50,000 people. You're now going to, if you lean into this, get a lot more people in the top of the funnel. So you probably need to double down on really good lead scoring. So how do you make sure that everyone who signed up for your marketing, your seminar on the future of the consumer isn't just, somebody who's curious or whatever? What tools do you use to actually make sure that your 1,000-person seminar, that you're actually really focused on the 150 people who are most likely to be buyers?
Right. Well, I think for me, I think it's okay to have people who are not necessarily a completely qualified person, right? I think you build really advocacy. And if you say, hey, you might not be in the correct field, maybe you work in something that's totally outside of this, but you could always say, hey, I saw this really cool tool. Like, let me share it with a friend. Let me say that. So right. I think there's that part one of that, which is we don't ever want to exclude people because you never know when they can become an advocate for you, when they can go to another company. And I think if you build that trust with them, especially when it's low effort and it's pretty easy to just say, hey, come join our webinar, that's probably number one. I think for us, we have a really strong ABM model, which means that we know very clearly what are the clients and what are the accounts that we potentially can do the best in. So I think for us,
sorry, just put a pin in that. You used an acronym, and I don't want to assume sort of seniority level of folks. ABF.
ABM, so account-based marketing. So account-based marketing is basically this idea of using a spear when it comes to marketing and being very pointed to make sure that you are focusing on the companies that you really want to work with. And I think for us, it's twofold, right? So we really use our sales team to invite in those kind of clients to come join. And we really use these types of webinars as a carrot to dangle in front of them to say, hey, let's get you a little bit warmer, come join this conversation. 2, we really partner with different industry associations, whether that's in the food and beverage industry, market research industry, to make sure that we're really driving the most high qualified people into our section, into our webinar and our top of funnel. And 3, we really use that list to then really qualify the people that are attending. And we make sure that our sales team in general, they're really only focusing on those people. So they're not wasting a lot of effort on people who might not be qualified.
Now, when you partner with those industry associations, do you bring in somebody from the association to be part of the conversation and therefore essentially they're likely to then market it? Or are you, because some of those associations are in the business of selling lists or selling access to your members, would you ever pay for that access, or are they willing to just market it because their person's on the webinar?
I think it depends. I think it really depends. So for us, there's a couple of different models. I'm not going to pretend every single time we get these for free, right? There are some times you have to pay, and that's just the reality of the situation.
And if it's a bunch of great leads, it could be easily worth it, right?
Right. Exactly. It all really depends. So I'll give you a few examples. So one of them, the one I talked about, was that partnership with New Hope Network. So that was one where they are really the industry leader. They are a thought leader in food and beverage. So it made a lot of sense to invite them to the webinar. And we know that people within that industry, they want to hear not from us, but they want to hear from a thought leader. So together, what we did is, hey, let's collaborate together on a research report, and let's jointly present that. So really using your industry knowledge to help color the way that we're talking about it. And we really use Suzy to run that entire thing. So I think that's example number one. I think for our market research trade associations, what we found is that people there, they don't necessarily want to hear a research report, and something like that is a little bit too niche probably for that. And we have found that being able to bring in different clients that fall within that association to talk about the challenges that they're facing, how they're potentially using a tool like Suzy, has been the most engaging type of content for that. And I think a lot of times I see the mistake that marketers use is that they're like, let me create a webinar that's like 5 easy ways that I can use, XYZ tool. Like, that's not really going to drive people to your thing. And it's a lot more of a, stamp of approval and say, hey, I'm going to have Pepsi come join our webinar and talk about, market research and the way that potentially they're using a tool like us. So we just did one last week that was Pepsi, Unilever, and Kraft, 3 of our partners really talking about, market research, and then they underpinned it and really weaved in different ways that Suzy might be part of that narrative.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. And also really excited that you introduced the company as a New York City-based company, and hopefully will continue to be so. I know a lot of your team's probably, still in parents' basements and scattered a bit, but hopefully we could all see each other around the city sometime soon when it's safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all so much, and hope you all found this to be an interesting conversation.
Definitely. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye.